The man didn't yell. He didn't need to. His voice was deep, steady, like an announcement before takeoff, but beneath it ran a cold undertone that made one thing very clear. He wasn't speaking. He was commanding. "I don't think you should be here." The sentence dropped in the middle of the priority boarding zone at gate B36, bathed in white light, sleek leather seats, and a line of people tiptoeing forward as if luxury could hear footsteps. A black woman stood there, wearing a beige trench coat, her neatly braided hair, and an old leather satchel on her shoulder. She wasn't cutting in line. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, with a Group 1 boarding pass displayed on her phone. And yet the captain stood squarely in front of her, not looking at the boarding pass. He looked instead at the color of her skin. The way she stood was upright, at the name printed on her ticket, Maya Coltrane. And in that instant, he delivered his judgment. "You can move to the back. That area is for standard passengers." No one in the line said a word. A middle-aged white man nearby snorted, "Girls from those neighborhoods don't know a thing about first class." And just like that, silence began to spread. A thick kind of silence, heavy as an invisible wall. No one met her eyes. They looked at their shoes, at the ceiling, pretended to be on the phone. An airport security officer began to approach, hand resting on his radio. But Maya Coltrane didn't move. She stood still, as if the wind itself couldn't push her. Her eyes locked with the captain's, who still believed he had control of the situation. For a brief moment, something in her gaze made him hesitate. Maya slowly took out her phone from her leather case, unlocked it with a fingerprint, and sent a message. Very short, no emotion. Then she looked up and spoke in a voice just loud enough to be heard, but clear enough to leave no doubt. "I suggest you don't call security, because the person you're trying to remove from this line may have the authority to ground the entire aircraft you're about to command." No one laughed. No one moved. But one thing was now sure. An airline had taken one step too far, and Maya Coltrane, the black woman they assumed was out of place, was the person holding the key to a collapse they never saw coming. Maya Coltrane didn't like airports. She had been through more than 70 airports across the United States, from tiny regional airfields in Montana to major hubs like LAX and Atlanta, and every one of them felt the same: too cold, too bright, and always with someone looking at her like she didn't belong there. She was a senior safety inspector for the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, vested with special authority under Title 49 of the United States Code. In other words, when necessary, she could suspend the entire operational system of an airline on the spot. But Maya never wore that authority on her sleeve. She wore black trousers, a grey blouse, and a beige trench coat, her hair styled in long box braids that fell down her back. She didn't need a badge, because she knew being a black woman standing in a priority boarding line was already enough to be placed under the unspoken rule of "prove yourself." She had learned not to lift her head too quickly, not to flinch too visibly at offhand remarks, not to blink when someone whispered about the smell of her natural hair. That morning, the flight from Boston Logan to San Diego seemed like any other. Maya arrived 90 minutes early, scanned her Group 1 boarding pass, and stood in the right place. Nothing unusual until the captain appeared, Richard Hale. Tall, white, steel-grey eyes and the walk of a man familiar with power. He didn't look at her ticket. He just looked at her and issued an order. When Maya was a child, her mother, a school teacher, was once removed from a flight for wearing torn knee jeans while traveling with her daughter. Maya had stood at the boarding gate crying as she watched her mother lower her head silently and give up her business class seat for a white passenger. That day, Maya made herself a promise. If she ever had the authority, she would never let that silence happen again. And now before her stood a captain reenacting the very exact moment from 19 years ago, except this time, he had picked the wrong woman to disrespect. A nearby employee, a young black woman, maybe 24, had noticed the name Coltrane on the boarding pass. Her eyes flickered with confusion. She glanced at Maya as if to ask, "Is it you?" Maya didn't answer. She gave a subtle nod, and the woman looked as though she might cry. In a place where a single "I'm sorry, let me double-check" could have salvaged someone's dignity, Captain Richard Hale had chosen judgment instead. What he didn't know was this: Maya Coltrane had once witnessed a plane crash caused by a sensor that hadn't been checked in time. And it was Maya who had brought 3 operations managers to testify before Congress. But never had she seen anyone dare to look her in the face in the middle of an airport and say, "You don't belong here." Maya's silence wasn't fear. It was a bell. And when that bell rang, not one man would fall, but an entire system. Captain Richard Hale still stood there, blocking the jet bridge like a human wall, cold, unyielding, and entirely unmoved by the facts. In Maya's hand, her phone still displayed the Group 1 boarding pass clearly, indisputably. "Did you not hear me?" He repeated this time with a voice thick and low, the kind that carries cockpit authority. "This lane is for first-class passengers, not for those trying their luck." He didn't speak loudly, but loud enough for everyone in line to hear. A middle-aged white woman across the aisle glanced at Maya and muttered, "I think they should give the janitorial staff uniforms so we don't get confused." A soft chuckle bubbled up from somewhere in the crowd. No one found it funny, but no one protested either. Maya still said nothing. She didn't have to. Her silence stood like a boulder in a fast river. The black woman at the check-in counter, her name tag read, Renee, saw everything. She knew better than to intervene in a captain's business. But her hands clenched tightly beneath the counter, as if trying to keep herself from trembling. She had once been fired just 9 months earlier for assisting an elderly black passenger with their luggage into the priority elevator. "I understand apps can glitch sometimes," Captain Hale continued, arms crossed. "But if you don't step out of this line right now, I will have security remove you from this area. Immediately." The threat dropped like a verdict written in bias. No one in line spoke. Some bowed their heads. Some shuffled back as if afraid of being involved. Maya slowly lifted her head. She wasn't angry, but in her eyes there was a depth untouchable like the sky on a moonless night. "There is no glitch here," she replied, her voice calm, cold. "There is only a man, refusing to look at the data because it doesn't fit his prejudice." She held up her phone quietly, offering it to Renee. "Scan it. Everything is correct. More correct than the way they're treating us." At that, Captain Hale turned toward Renee and barked, "This isn't your business. Step aside. I'll handle this." Renee stepped back, lips pressed tight. At this point, the insult was no longer personal. It had become a public demonstration of power, staged in an airport where skin color dictated worth, and silence became a form of complicity. Captain Hale stepped closer, his shadow falling over Maya. His voice dropped darker. "You have 5 seconds. If you don't move, I will report you as a disruptive passenger. They'll cuff you right here in front of everyone. Trust me, I've done it before." The woman at the counter took a deep breath. A young white man in line turned away, as if unwilling to witness what came next. But Maya stood her ground. Her hands didn't shake. Her feet didn't move. She spoke one sentence. "Slowly, I hope. You're sure? Because the person you chose to disrespect this time isn't a passenger. She's the one the FAA entrusted to audit and suspend your entire crew." No one said a word, only the hum of the overhead air conditioning. And slowly the eyes around them began to change. She didn't say another word. She reached into the pocket of her coat and pulled out her phone. Maya Coltrane's face remained utterly neutral, like she was checking her email like any other traveler. But what she typed wasn't meant for public airport Wi-Fi. "M. Coltrane, code Zeta 4, initiate immediate full ramp audit." Starting point flight 1479, Boston to San Diego. Incident with PIC Hale R. Race-based obstruction at gate. I am on site. Team to mobilize. On the receiving end of the encrypted message was David Zhou, the FAA's Northeast Regional Director, a Chinese-American man. He didn't ask for clarification. He replied, "Confirmed. Strike team ETA 17 minutes. You lead." And like a hairline crack spreading across a wall, once thought indestructible. That was the beginning. At Boston, Logan Airport, passengers remained still. Captain Richard Hale took a step back for the first time since arriving. There was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, not because Maya had raised her voice, but because she hadn't. She stood there, like someone calmly awaiting a scheduled meeting. The Airbus A321 Skyreach Flight 1479 still idled on the tarmac ready for takeoff. But within 20 minutes, it would have to turn back. And every passenger, every employee, every decision would become part of an official federal investigation. Inside the aircraft, First Officer Daniel Price. The younger one, with wide, startled eyes, ran out of the cabin after noticing the crowd forming at the gate. He approached the captain. "Rich, what's going on?" "She's a disruptive passenger," Hale muttered, still watching Maya. "She won't leave the first-class line." "What did she do?" Daniel asked. "She looked at me," Hale hissed. And for the first time his voice didn't sound angry. It sounded afraid. A few passengers began pulling out their phones, not to film a ticket check drama, but to record a moment no one had expected. The woman who moments ago was threatened with removal was now making a direct call to the highest level of the Federal Aviation Authority. When the group in navy jackets bearing the FAA insignia appeared at the end of the concourse, a hush spread across the gate. Leading the way was a bespectacled middle-aged man with a tablet, followed by 6 specialists carrying equipment cases and a psychologist trained in conducting employee interviews. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't demand authority. They didn't have to. Because the moment people saw the badge on Maya's collar, Federal Aviation Administration, Inspector. The boarding gate became an unannounced command center. For the first time, Captain Richard Hale took a complete step back. He whispered, "Who are you? Who are you?" Maya turned, looked directly at the man who had dared to threaten her in front of a crowd. She didn't smile. She said quietly, "But somehow every person at the checkpoint heard, 'The person you thought didn't belong here is the one with the authority to review every line in your flight log, from the landing gear to your own eyes.'" In the control tower, the flight status for Skyreach 1479 changed from taxi to returning to gate. No alarms, no medical emergency, just one directive from the FAA: temporarily suspend clearance for takeoff. Reason: unannounced internal inspection. Inside the cockpit, Captain Richard Hale clutched the yoke so tightly his knuckles turned white. He said nothing. He couldn't. The authority he had built over 2 decades was now unraveling minute by minute as he guided the plane, back like a man retreating in defeat. In the first-class cabin, passengers began whispering to one another. A white woman asked, "Does anyone know what's happening?" An Asian man beside her replied softly, "I think that's a federal inspector. She's leading an investigation." Who? The woman frowned. That woman, he pointed toward Maya, the one the captain tried to have removed 20 minutes ago. When the plane came to a stop at gate B36, the doors opened. There was no applause, only the click of leather shoes and the synchronized footsteps of the FAA team entering the cabin. With the calm precision of people used to stepping into crash sites. Only this time they had come to prevent one. Maya stepped onto the aircraft. She didn't have to say anything. She didn't flash a badge. Her presence was a statement. Richard Hale remained seated in the cockpit. His panicked eyes stared toward the cabin door and saw Maya approaching. And that was when he realized the nightmare he had carelessly triggered now had a face. Captain Hale Meyer said, her voice like wind brushing against sheet metal. "This aircraft from this moment is a federal investigation site. I'm ordering you and First Officer Price to exit the cockpit. We will begin full inspection of the CVR and FDR cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder. And after that, we'll discuss how you forgot to wear your prescription glasses while operating a $130 million aircraft." Hale's face drained of color. You can't." "I can. And I am," Meyer answered. "And if you have any records from the Boston-San Diego flight 3 weeks ago, I suggest you have them ready." One of the FAA agents, Frank, an engine systems analyst, stepped into the cockpit with a technician. In their hands were a data drive and an authentication scanner. "We'll need the full logbook, and if you signed off on the tire inspection, I sincerely hope today's tires aren't worn down to the steel wires." Bit by bit, the cracks began to show, fragment by fragment. First Officer Daniel's statement confirmed. The captain had not worn his glasses during pre-flight. He hadn't visually inspected the tires, he had checked them off perfunctorily. Worse still, Frank handed Meyer a photo from the tire camera on wheel number 3, a deep tear reaching the internal ply enough to cause a blowout upon landing. "And one last thing," Meyer said, her voice lowering. "You attempted to have a passenger removed simply because she didn't look like someone who typically stands in the priority line. You'll answer to the FAA, to the Congressional Air Safety Committee, and to every passenger who witnessed everything today." When Hale was ordered to surrender his pilot's license, medical certificate, and to disembark, he was no longer a captain. He was a man stripped of what he never thought could be taken, a position built on prejudice he had once considered default. And Meyer stepped out of the cockpit without a single glance back. This was no longer a boarding gate dispute. This was an indictment. Captain Richard Hale exited the aircraft in silence. There were no medals on his chest, no flight crew badge around his neck, just a hollow look drifting over the passengers he once considered his customers. One passenger instinctively turned their phone toward him. The video captured Hale being asked to surrender his license, stepping off the aircraft in the quiet defeat of a man who no longer held power. And it was soon posted on Twitter with the caption, "This is what happens when you disrespect the wrong person. FAA, Inspector Coltrane. Karma is procedure." Inside the cabin, the passengers were no longer murmuring. No one reached for their phone. No one snapped photos. They sat and looked at Meyer as if they had just witnessed a transfer of power. Not through shouting, not through reputation, but through unwavering resistance to wrongdoing. She didn't address them. No thank yous, no smiles. Meyer stepped off the plane and walked straight into the technical review area alongside Frank and Maria, her closest partners in the investigation team. Maria, the flight record analyst, handed her a tablet. "Hale signed off on tire inspections 3 times this month," she said, "but there's no corresponding data from the tire pressure scanners. He approved them visually, without ever actually looking. We call that pencil whipping signing off, just to stay on schedule." Meyer wasn't surprised. She'd seen this before, but this time the problem wasn't just Hale. Meanwhile, 2 other FAA members uncovered a pattern of maintenance reports with duplicated signatures. 3 technicians had signed off on a hydraulic system inspection. None of them had even been on shift that day. Frank furrowed his brow, reviewing the checklist from a Boston-Dallas flight the previous week. Same left-wing pressure alert repeated 4 times. Each time marked as no fault found. But there's no printout from the diagnostic system, and the last sign-off, he paused, was the head of maintenance. Elsewhere, First Officer Daniel Price sat in a quiet interview room, his eyes heavy with fatigue. "Ms. Coltrane, we were pushed to stay on schedule," he said softly. "If any pilot complained of fatigue or asked for a recheck, they'd get flagged as delay-prone. We call it the soft block list. Nobody talks about it. We're all afraid to lose flight hours. Maya looked at Daniel for a long moment. No judgment. She quietly recorded every word. At Skyreach's executive office on the 4th floor of the airport, Marcus Leland, the executive vice president, was pale as he read the official FAA notification Level 4 expanded inspection. Includes all technical staff flight crews and JFK Boston-San Diego routes over 90 days. He shouted at his assistant. Why didn't anyone tell me there was a federal inspector on that flight? The assistant silently placed a scanned boarding pass on his desk. Maya Coltrane, Seat 1A, flagged FAA courtesy clearance. Marcus collapsed into his chair. Oh God, not her. Meanwhile, Maya stood before the Technical Operations Board, her eyes fixed on the nameplates. We will seize the last 12 months of logbooks. We will interview every maintenance staff member. We will flag every warning that was marked ignored or visually checked. And this time, no one gets to stay silent. On the cold steel desk, Maya opened her tablet and revisited the message she had sent earlier. Incident race-based obstruction at gate. But now, it was no longer just about racism. It was about a system that had grown used to filtering truth, the same way it filtered who was allowed to stand in the priority line. Within 36 hours, Boston Logan Airport was no longer the same. Outside passengers still lined up as usual, but inside Skyreach's Technical and Operations Division, an unprecedented audit had begun. 17 pilots, 22 maintenance crew, and 5 flight coordinators were called in, one after another, for questioning. Some cracked, some tried to hide, and then someone spoke. His name was Andre Walker, a 37-year-old black maintenance technician. He entered the interview room with heavy steps, eyes avoiding Maya's. When Frank asked about the no-fault-found reports Andre had signed, he was silent for a long time. Then he spoke, voice choked. I didn't fill them out myself. My shift lead told me just to sign it. Said the FAA never digs that deep. He paused. But Inspector Coltrane isn't like the others. She reminded me why I chose this job. I signed not because I was blind, but because I was too tired to fight the system anymore. Maya didn't speak. She just nodded. A nod like forgiveness, as if she understood the feeling of someone who knows they're sinking, but he is too exhausted to swim. Andre's admission was the key that unlocked the vault of systemic failure. In the next 48 hours, Maya's team uncovered. Worn tires signed off as approved without replacement. Faulty sensors marked as intermittent instead of being replaced. Maintenance staff without proper certification are still allowed to sign off. Pilots flying well beyond federally allowed duty hours. But it wasn't the numbers that kept Maya up that night. It was the stories. A young flight attendant, Alina Gutierrez, teared up as she said, Captain Hale once told me to dye my hair lighter if I wanted to work first class. He said I was too dark-skinned to match the premium cabin. A co-pilot of Indian descent, Dev Patel, spoke with a trembling voice. I was removed from a flight because a VIP passenger said they didn't feel safe sitting behind an Asian man. The team leader didn't defend me. He just said, we need to preserve the airline's image. Maya listened to it all, documented it all. Each story is a brick stacked into a wall of accountability stronger than any engineering report. At Skyreach headquarters, Executive VP Marcus Leland stood in an emergency meeting, eyes dark from sleepless nights. What can we do to stop this? He growled at the legal team. Nothing, one replied. Because this time, the investigator has nothing to lose. And she holds everything. On the 4th day, Maya convened a meeting with the entire technical crew, a move unheard of for an FAA inspector. She didn't stand at a podium. She sat with them, face to face, and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. I didn't come here to destroy anyone's job. I came to make sure everyone can still go home safely. We've lived under a culture that taught us silence is survival. But it's not. Silence is burial. In that room, they didn't see a federal official. They saw a woman who had held her tongue her whole life. Until finally, she stood for the ones who never dared to speak. On the morning of the 5th day, a 47-second video began to circulate across social media. No graphics, no voiceover, just the image of a white airline captain blocking a boarding lane and a black woman silently staring at him without stepping back. The caption faded in at the bottom. She didn't yell. She didn't beg. She just stood, and the whole system cracked. Hat Maya Coltrane, Pashpat Gate B36, Karma. Is procedure. Within 4 hours, the video surpassed 2 million views. People didn't just share it, they began rewriting the story. A former flight attendant, I was once locked in the service galley for looking too Latina to greet passengers at the front. Thank you, Maya. A black mother I used to teach my daughter to stay silent when harassed at the airport. Now, I'll teach her to look them in the eye. The media jumped in. CNN, NPR, Vox, even Fox News covered the story. But no one could get access to Maya, because she refused all interviews. She kept working as if there weren't 6 million views trailing behind her. Meanwhile, at SkyReach headquarters, a quiet panic had begun to spread. Stock dropped 14% in a single morning. Partners froze contracts. The board convened emergency meetings every 6 hours. The CEO began receiving silent phone calls from investors. Then the FAA issued a public statement. The investigation is being conducted under the direct command of Inspector Maya Coltrane. She holds sole technical and legal authority over this matter. No one within the FAA had ever seen wording like that before. No one had ever seen a 32-year-old black woman named in a federal press release as an institution. At a Southern law school, a professor addressed his students. Maya Coltrane isn't just enforcing the law. She is proof of what the system often forgets. True power doesn't need to scream to be heard. 1 week later, the FAA issued formal penalties, $25.8 million in fines for maintenance violations and false reporting. 23 pilots grounded pending investigation. Mandatory recertification for 72 aircraft within 90 days. Full operational oversight of SkyReach's Northeast Division under special monitoring. When the announcement came, SkyReach CEO Raymond Coulson made his first public appearance. His face no longer bore the confidence that the airline's polished commercials had instilled in him. Before a forest of cameras, he lowered his head. We failed to listen, and we allowed a toxic culture to survive for far too long. Inspector Coltrane didn't just issue a warning. She saved us from ourselves. But Maya wasn't at the press conference. She was at another airport, standing silently in a boarding line. No one recognized her, because this time she didn't need to step forward to prove anything. A young brown-skinned employee with a head wrap approached her and smiled gently. "You're Maya Coltrane, aren't you?" Maya nodded. I just wanted to say thank you," the woman whispered. "For the first time, I saw someone not scream, but make the whole country go silent." 3 weeks after the investigation began, Maya Coltrane walked into the SkyReach main conference room, not as an interrogator, but as someone offering a path to restoration. In front of her sat a long table lined with the airline's senior leadership. They could no longer hide their exhaustion. Wrinkled shirts, nervous pen taps, fear behind their polished titles. Maya opened her laptop. She didn't project anything on a screen. She turned on the microphone and began to speak. Her voice was soft, but each word landed like a nail into wood. "I'm not here to destroy SkyReach. I'm here because not one of you dared to stop it. No one stood up when maintenance signed off on inspections they never conducted. No one spoke when a flight attendant was removed for the texture of her hair. No one objected when a captain claimed dark skin was grounds for denying entry to a priority line. The room tightened, like water pulled taut before a storm. CEO Raymond Coulson nodded slowly. We acknowledge that. We need to change. We have no other choice. Maya looked at him for a long moment, then spoke gently. You do have a choice. Not to avoid blame, but to fix it properly. She opened a folder, laid it on the table. The cover read, The Coltrane Program, Aviation Safety and Ethics Reform. 3 core pillars. 1. Retrain all technical staff pilots and flight attendants led by instructors previously excluded due to background, gender, or race. 2. Establish an anonymous whistleblower system that reports directly to the FAA, not through the airline's internal audit board. 3. Create a legal support fund for employees unfairly terminated, including those who left the company a decade ago. The CEO swallowed hard. An HR executive asked, Who will oversee the program? Maya paused, then answered, Not me. I'm not a manager. I'm an inspector. I'm here to remind you that power is not immune to consequences, and silence is never neutral. She stood to leave. Then someone spoke from behind her. Andre Walker, the technician who had once confessed his silence. Ms. Coltrane. Maya turned. I'd like to be the first to sign up as a trainer for the program, because I once chose silence, and I don't want my son to do the same. She nodded gently. This time there was a faint smile at the corner of her lips. Something in the room began to soften. Not because someone had fallen, but because someone had stood up. That afternoon on her flight out of Boston, Maya sat in seat 2A. Not first class, but the seat next to the emergency exit. She didn't need luxury. She needed a view. Who would need help stepping out of danger first? 6 months after Maya Coltrane sent that encrypted message from Gate B36, nothing had changed in the skies above America. Planes still took off. People still moved. Airports still glowed with that blinding white light. But at a small airport in Cincinnati, something quiet happened. A black woman stood in the priority boarding line. Her hair was braided neatly. Beige coat. Leather crossbody bag. A white check-in agent looked at her. Hesitation flickered in his eyes. The woman lifted her ticket gently. The agent lowered his head, smiled. Welcome aboard, Ms. Coltrane. It's an honor to serve you today. Maya nodded. She said nothing, but for the first time in a long time, her smile reached her eyes. Behind her, a young brown-skinned girl whispered to her mother. Mom, who is she? The mother replied softly without turning her head. She's someone who was once asked to step out of line, and then stood, so girls like you wouldn't have to step back anymore. No bronze statue, no Wikipedia page, just a system-repaired forgotten name spoken aloud, and a woman who chose stillness over rage. She once said in a closed-door FAA hearing, justice isn't always a punch. Sometimes, it's just standing still, not moving even half a step, so that others have no choice but to retreat. In the sky, no one knows who sits in what seat. But there's one thing every airline now knows. Never underestimate someone simply because they stand silently in line. Because that person may be the last one you'd want to face when the truth needs a name. In the sky, there's no room for ego, for bias or fear. There is only procedure, and those brave enough to uphold it, even when the world tells them to step aside. Maya Coltrane.